Medusa. The name alone conjures an image burned into our cultural subconscious. A terrifying woman banished to the shadows of a damp cavern, eyes glowing a sickly green, crowned by a writhing mass of venomous serpents. To look at her is an immediate death sentence. The evidence of her curse litters her domain. The petrified remains of ambitious men, their terrified screams frozen forever in solid stone. For millennia, we've accepted the premise of this story without a second thought. She is the ultimate villain of antiquity, a nightmare of a creature whose only real purpose in the narrative is to wait in the dark until someone brave enough comes along to hunt her down. Enter Perseus, the demigod, the champion, the classic archetype of the righteous hero. His glory, his entire legacy, is cemented the exact second his sword separates her head from her shoulders. But let's pause and look past the epic poetry. What happens to this classic tale of good versus evil if we flip the perspective? What if the beloved hero we've been cheering for was actually acting as a state-sanctioned executioner, and the monster he vanquished was actually a victim? When you pull back the layers of ancient Greek mythology, the story of Medusa reveals something far more unsettling than a woman with snakes for hair. It is arguably the oldest surviving blueprint for systemic victim blaming. To understand how that happened, we have to rewind the timeline to a point long before the snakes in the stone. Medusa wasn't born a monster. She was born mortal, and she spent her early life as a devoted priestess. Her days were spent maintaining the sacred rites in the temple of Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war. As part of her position, Medusa took strict vows of celibacy and purity, dedicating her entire existence to serving the deity. Then there is Poseidon, the god of the sea. Unlike a mortal bound by vows, he operated at the absolute peak of the Olympian hierarchy. He wielded immense, unchecked divine authority, answering to essentially no one. The inciting incident of this entire myth occurs when Poseidon enters Athena's temple. He corners Medusa within those sacred walls and violently assaults her. In the context of ancient Greece, this act of violence was also a brazen political insult. Poseidon had deliberately desecrated the heavily protected, sacred domain of another major god. Looking at the severity of the crime, the logical expectation is that the divine justice system would step in. You would expect the powerful perpetrator who violated a sacred space to face immediate consequences. That is the exact opposite of what happens. When Athena discovers the desecration of her temple, she doesn't unleash her fury on Poseidon. Instead, she directs the full force of her wrath straight at Medusa. This flowchart illustrates the strict political logic of the pantheon. The elites at the top of the hierarchy are heavily incentivized to protect each other's reputations, to maintain the overall power structure. Punishing another top-tier god would create a catastrophic institutional rift, so the system protects itself. The blame and the consequences of the crime are pushed all the way down the ladder, landing squarely on the single most vulnerable, isolated person in the entire equation. Athena transforms her former priestess into a gorgon. The snakes and the petrifying gaze were not given to Medusa as weapons to defend herself. They were a deliberate curse engineered to guarantee her total social exile. She was made completely untouchable. This drastically recontextualizes Perseus. When he finally shows up with his sword, he isn't saving the world from an apocalyptic threat. He is an opportunist, scoring political points by assassinating a woman who had already been broken, abused, and cast out by her own society. Medusa's monstrous form was never a biological reality. It was a manufactured cover-up. It was a convenient fiction designed to shield a powerful leader from the fallout of his own crime. Because history is authored by the victors, Medusa's original identity is permanently erased from the popular record. She is stripped of her status as a victim and eternally branded as a villain. While her tragedy is buried under layers of myth, the man who ended her life gets a vastly different treatment. Perseus is celebrated across centuries of art, literature, and modern pop culture, his violence unquestioned and his heroism set in stone. Sociologists have a specific term for this dynamic, the scapegoat mechanism. It occurs when a community or institution resolves its own internal crises by projecting its sins onto a marginalized target. sacrificing them to restore the illusion of order. That mechanism didn't disappear with the fall of ancient Greece. We see the exact same pattern operate in the modern world. Institutions continually default to trusting convenient, sanitized narratives that protect the elite, while aggressively silencing and punishing those who suffer the abuse. It forces us to look back at the historical record and ask an uncomfortable question. If Medusa's story is a lie, we have to re-examine all the other accepted villains in our cultural history. We have to look at them through the clear lens of institutional power dynamics. Ultimately, this ancient story leaves us with a stark warning. The most destructive threats to our society don't hide out in dark, damp caves waiting to be slain. They operate openly in broad daylight, seated comfortably in positions of unquestioned authority.